you're watching a very special episode of Agenda AWANI, broadcasting from the sidelines of the Energy Asia Conference, where, of course, the main priority is our journey towards transition towards renewable energy and the hurdles and the challenges and, of course, also the opportunities that we have before us. So, we would be remiss to talk about renewables without talking to the biggest oil and gas company in the country, Petronas. And I'm joined by none other than the chairman of Energy Asia and also the president and group CEO of Petronas, Tan Sri Tengku Muhammad Taufik. Tan Sri, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you. Privileged to have this opportunity to share some insights.
So, interesting conference so far. We're recording this on the final day.
Yeah.
But what's your plan to ensure that this inaugural conference, this is the first time, will actually result in meaningful action towards transitioning to green energy and not just more dialogues between heads of governments and industry titans and corporate sector players?
Yes. I thank you for the question, and I think it's a question that's deservedly raised because perhaps there's a degree of wariness from participants and industries and sectors in addressing what is an existential challenge for societies, business at large, which is how do we tackle the energy transition and ensure societies end up living sustainably while not losing out on prosperity, particularly here in Asia. The aim of Energy Asia was a conference that is premised on one belief, that the whole world, in its promise to achieve net zero, cannot do so unless Asia is on board and Asia gets along for the ride and Asia achieves net zero. It's quite simple. The statistics will show you that we will represent more than half of the world's population. We are responsible for the bulk of the emissions. And if we don't tackle this, even as Asian economies pursue economic development, there is not going to be a net zero that is achievable within any time frame that we prescribe. Therefore, as you mentioned earlier, the need for renewables and energy compels us to have this particular forum be inclusive. We can't just talk about oil and gas, we can't just talk about renewables, but we have to have every participant in this larger, more complex energy ecosystem join us. And to avoid it becoming a talk shop or a simple trade show, or just a platform where policy debates occur without resolution, the aim is to ensure both the main sessions, the plenaries, the panels, come out with core agreements, which we hope to be able to share towards the end of this session, and turn that into action. Yeah. In my opening address, I think that I requested not only that you have meaningful dialogues, but also turn it into actionable solutions. And Petronas has to lead the way. Petronas has announced a number of CCS initiatives, which are carbon abatement levers critical for us to contain emissions within Malaysia, within Petronas, and also addressing the carbon abatement needs of our neighbours and neighbouring economies. Over and above that, I think the Jantari has also signed up for a number of initiatives, not only at home, but also with cooperation with entities such as Semco, to address the growing renewable needs across Asia, in line with its strategic aim to address the three pillars of renewables, hydrogen production, and improving green mobility.
Yeah, of course, Petronas is a behemoth, and what you've alluded to before is that you need to lead by example, obviously. Now, with size and scale comes a lot of advantages, but also probably disadvantages. Some big companies are slower to pivot. So in Petronas' transition towards renewables, how do you balance the short and long-term goals of the company, taking into account various factors, profitability, financial sustainability, and also social responsibility?
In Petronas, the clarion call is neatly distilled into three numbers: 50, 30, 0. We have a rallying call centered around these three numbers: 50% improvement of our cash flow relative to baseline year of pre-pandemic 2019, and then we also have a 30% new non-traditional sources of revenue to be achieved by 2030. So it's an aggressive target. All of this leads to a zero, which is the net zero that we aim to deliver by 2050. There is always going to be a debate internally, not only from a returns perspective, but also from a skill sets and risks perspective, how we do this in a clear, coherent, and returns accretive manner. Let me underline here. You mentioned that we are a national oil company. We have an obligation under PDA 1974 to still continue monetizing the hydrocarbon resources of Malaysia. So is Petronas stepping away from fossil fuels? Fossil fuels, I think one of the speakers in the opening session alluded to it as being system A. It generates the cash, it helps returns be improved over time, and you will see, even though it's challenged going forward, that the returns within the core business still will remain in the mid-teens. When you enter into renewables, where it's more utility in nature, you will probably, at best, be registering single-digit returns. So it is a matter of capital allocation, managing risks, but also a completely different way of working. You will see that oil companies typically have a global presence using the core areas of oil and gas, but renewables requires localized know-how.
Yeah.
So there's going to be a completely different approach and tactic in deploying your capital, making sure you work with partners, the choice of technologies, and most importantly, which is what we also hope to unlock here, is having the accommodating policies and financial support.
So, mass adoption of sustainable energy practices obviously require large amounts of investments, among others in R&D, infrastructure, what have you. One example is to make EV chargers ubiquitous to increase adoption and reduce costs through scale. So at a time when the economy is tepid and investing appetite is low, so how will this be achieved?
Energy companies, oil and gas companies, have an obligation to deliver performance and not be framed by quarter horizons.
Right.
We have to think about decades of energy security while we manage energy transition in the best coherent and non-disruptive manner. Because remember, energy is a right of every economy. You start disrupting it, you're going to have mass unrest.
Yep.
Yeah? So insofar as accessing finance, this is where there's been a disconnect. There's been an ask for us to quickly switch over to more renewable, lower carbon solutions. However, while it's been made available, pronounced either as early as the Paris Agreement, where 100 billion was committed from developed economies moving to developing and emerging economies, that has trickled. It's not come through in a big way. In COP26, as I recall, there was an announcement, an alliance was formed, GFANZ, where 130 trillion of assets under management was supposed to be addressing this.
Yep.
The frameworks, the taxonomy, the appetite for credit and risk still have yet to be unlocked. At the same time, the clock on the carbon budget, as we heard yesterday, is also dwindling. So there is a choice to be made here. We need to make real, meaningful investments, and they need to be directed to the economies that most deserve them. And I would contend that's Asia and Africa, where emerging economies are clamoring for their right to pursue economic development, but compelled to address the challenge of moving to a renewable energy system using a lens that's developed by developed economies. So there is a disconnect because right here in Asia, affordability is key.
Yeah.
Energy security is key. I think you've heard about the phrase energy trilemma. And for many families in Asia, in Africa for that matter, what happens at the next meal time is far more important than what happens to a generation 2 decades hence.
Yep. So, one of the main problems of this journey towards renewables for any company or any nation on earth, in fact, is the reporting standards or measurement standards which are not uniform, causing a lot of confusion,
Yeah.
a lot of vagueness.
Yeah.
So, for Petronas, how do you exactly measure the impact of your renewable energy initiatives on the environment, on society, and also on the economy?
At Petronas, because despite our origins and our nature as being a national oil company, we're judged pretty much like an international oil company.
Yep.
As we tap capital markets, we've been compelled to move to IFRS. As we move forward, and we've already adopted sustainability reporting 6-7 years ago, as we move forward, we need to improve this and meet the standards that are required, whether be it TCFD, soon it's going to be a movement to ISSB where the drafts have already been issued. For smaller entities, for the ecosystem around us, for the value chain that we work with, this is daunting. Mm-hmm. Not everyone has a huge legal team, not everyone has a huge financial reporting pool of talent to access. It is daunting because without those taxonomies being sorted out, as you said, confusing and fluid, capital can't flow. And this is where I think one of the earliest things that many businesses across all sectors will need to adopt is having clear sustainability disclosures mapped against metrics that are measurable and that can be independently verified.
Right. Now onto the big picture for the last question. What do you think are the major hurdles that's slowing our transition as a country towards becoming or achieving our net zero carbon target in time?
The hurdles we're facing are not unfamiliar to our government. I think you've seen it in many other emerging economies. I'm very, very encouraged by the statements made by Yang Amat Prime Minister that a number of roadmaps will be issued soon, the transition roadmap, and I think also accompanying that there will be a launch of a number of policies that help promote, be it carbon management, be it hydrogen. The key now is that governments, not just ours, need to realize that there needs to be an alignment around standards, regulation, and policy, or else this management of carbon is going to be left distinctly within the purview of each jurisdiction. And if there's disconnect, how do you price carbon, which is one of the integral elements that we said need to be there for a sustainable economy. There's no pricing of carbon, there's no real management of how you regulate movement of carbon across regions. We're going to be in trouble.
Yep.
So those are things that need to be addressed. Of course, and I hate to raise this, the looming challenge of targeted subsidies.
Right.
If you're going to promote and motivate the use of renewables, pricing needs to be market to motivate people to shift. I know this is a very difficult and complex challenge for our government, and we at Petronas are working very closely to help them roll out as much as we can. We want to make sure that the transition is just, responsible, and non-disruptive.
Right. Tan Sri, progress is never a straight line, but onwards and upwards.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Agenda Awani. We'll be right back. And you're back with Agenda Awani. I'm Luqman Haris. We are still broadcasting from the sidelines of Energy Asia. I'm now joined by Dr. Atul Arya. He's the Senior Vice President and Chief Energy Strategist of S&P Global. Dr. Atul, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So, tell us about CERAWeek, which is very exciting. CERAWeek by S&P Global's role in Energy Asia and also in collaboration with Petronas.
So we are the thought partners for inaugural Energy Asia. So we provided moderators, we helped with the program design, and we advised Petronas on selection of the speakers. So when they made the final decision on that. So we were, and also of course we worked on our Innovation Agora, where we actually designed the program and secured the speakers and moderated the sessions.
Right. You know, a constant criticism of conferences like this is it rarely results in enough meaningful action. But for you, how has this conference, the Energy Asia conference, the inaugural one at that as well, how has it been so far for you? And what are some of the big conversations that took place that excited you?
Yeah, by the way, my wife also says the same thing about meaningful action. I think I would say a couple of things. One is that you know, Asia's voice has to be heard in the global conversation about energy and climate change. And I think this conference is going to raise that profile for Asia and particularly ASEAN countries to have that voice. And remember, there is the COP meeting coming very quickly in December in Dubai, and many of these conversations this week are going to continue into Dubai, so that Asia, which has a need for a lot more energy, and that is going to require all kinds of energy, not just renewable energy, so that is going to be reflected. The second thing I would say is this issue of money, financing. We discussed that quite a bit. More money needs to come into flow here for all kinds of energy investment, and also for mitigation to mitigate the impact of climate change. So that was another big conversation. Last thing quickly to say is policies. And here, you know, the number of things can happen within the region. Countries can collaborate, and we saw that because of the participation of ministers, the Prime Minister here from Malaysia, and we're going to continue to have that conversation to say, can we create some policies which go across the countries into the region.
Right. It's interesting you mentioned that, because the previous guest alluded to exactly that, mentioning that for us to to effectively transition to green energy and to renewables, Asia needs to be in the game.
Yes.
The world needs Asia to do that as well, in tandem with the rest of the world. So what are some of the challenges that Asia has to face in terms of sustainability development, and how can we overcome these challenges?
Yeah, so I think the key to remember is that, if the worldwide we want to get to net zero, I think any date, 2050, 60, 70, that path to net zero has to go through Asia. You can't have that without that. So what can Asia do, or what will Asia need? I think one of the things Asia can do is it has a massive demographic dividend, and it's going to require a lot of people to contribute to this, development, and therefore, getting more engineers, more scientists, more technology people, more digital experts. All of that, Asia provides that great opportunity for young people to be part of the solution. The second thing which came across interestingly was, look, it's more about emissions and not about fuels. So we can have all the fuels we want to consume as long as we manage the emissions down. So I think the more technologies around, it's, for example, carbon capture was another big topic here this week, that can we accelerate, and Asia has opportunity to accelerate deployment of carbon capture, and actually Petronas here in Malaysia is going to start a project. They signed a deal with Total Energies to work on that project.
You mentioned that financing is one big problem, and I think that's a key point that we always discuss when talking about this topic. Do you feel that problem is particularly more difficult for Asia compared to quote-unquote wealthier countries in Europe in embarking on this journey?
I think yes, to some extent, because there are two issues where financing comes into play. One is that the cost of money, cost of debt, or cost of capital in Asia is generally higher. Even for not just for energy, for anything else, cost of interest rates are here higher. So therefore, and now the interest rates are going up around the world. So that means the cost of money for energy projects gets even higher. It means you need a much higher return. So that makes the financing difficult. The second thing is what I would call capacity building. So even though there is money available, the investors are reluctant to invest because they want to have assurance that there are people investing it rightly, there are the right people doing projects, correct projects, all of that. So I think that capacity building is happening, and there was a big meeting last week in Paris to debate this issue of financing. I feel that by end of this year, by the time we get to COP, we will see more financing coming through around the world to the global south, including to Asia.
In terms of global investors having less appetite to invest towards Asia for fear that the ROI would be much less than desired, do you think a lot of this is actually grounded in truth, or a lot of it is misperception?
Well, I think what is happening, and I'll just give you one quick example, is that if you look at the renewable investment, for example, in India, it's much, going very fast. So there was a fear, the same fear you raised was there a few years back. Nobody is investing in India. So I think it's over time. Keep in mind that the confidence builds. So you do one good project that leads to 5, and that leads to 20 and 100. I think that's the kind of pipeline of projects we are seeing. And actually, we heard this week some really big numbers in terms of what kind of renewable investment in Malaysia, and particularly in Sarawak, where they're talking about investing in hydrogen. So the confidence is building. I think there's one side of the confidence will be who is coming in to co-invest with the local companies, and a lot of international companies are coming in. That tells me that, there is sort of the tipping point is coming soon.
For a lot of Asian countries, Malaysia included, the focus for the past few years, especially in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, has been economic recovery, and the transition towards renewables have somewhat taken a back seat.
Absolutely.
How long do you think we will take to recover from the lost 2 or 3 years because of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, I think we're already on the path to recovery. And don't forget that it was not just the pandemic, but also the Russia-Ukraine war, because that raised the prices for energy and all of that. I think what we're seeing is that the world is starting to deal with those issues. And this year, as an example, oil prices are now down from relative to last year. Natural gas prices are down. So all of those things are going to help the people for whom energy is a big part of their overall, pocketbook cost. So I'm very optimistic that in the next, 2 to 3 years, we will see. I think we have this confidence even next year. We will see much more growth in investments and deployment of all kind of technologies.
For Asian countries predominantly, which consists predominantly of developing nations, emerging economies, do you think a stronger push towards renewables will inevitably slow economic growth?
No, actually this is, I was on a panel first day, and I mentioned this, that look, let's be clear, renewables meaning solar and wind are very cheap. So if you are any kind of country, and particularly in Asia, where electricity is, we need a lot of demand for it, just deploy renewables as fast as you can.
There's the perception that somehow it will slow down industrialization and urbanization, which is much needed in this part of the world.
Well, okay, so keep in mind that, when we say urbanization, there are different dimensions, different types of energy, right?
Right.
For transportation, which is a big part of urbanization, we are going to need oil, right? That's the fuel. It's not going to be renewable energy. So yes, we need oil. For power, we will need natural gas, and if we can use more gas than less coal, that would be great. And let's do as much renewables as possible. Last thing I would say is that there's a lot of room, low-hanging fruit for energy efficiency. Every dollar of energy we use up, it's a dollar in the pocket of the producer, and it saves money for the consumer. So I think those are the kind of levers, as I call low-hanging fruit, which should be deployed at scale as fast as possible.
Yeah. So you've got your low-hanging fruits, but I think the bulk of this initiative for any country, it takes time. It takes capital and it takes time.
Yes.
So I guess the general feeling or desire is to walk away from this conference, for example, feeling better and more optimistic that we are making good progress and we are at a better place than we were before. So what makes you have that feeling coming to the inaugural Energy Asia conference this time?
So as you asked earlier,
Yeah.
Is it all talk, or whether, as they say, show me the money question, right? So I think what I walk away from here is not just talk, but some real actions. Tengu Topik mentioned, 11 deals. I think they were all Petronas deals signed. So I think we're going to see more deployment of capital, some new technologies, some mature technologies. So, by the way, there's multiple things people have to do, and there's multiple pathways. When we say energy transition, we should really talk about energy transitions. Last thing I would say is, there's this view that it's like, we all have our phones, and you press a button and there's a new software comes in. Energy business is hardware business.
Yep.
Version change takes decades,
Yep.
not few minutes. So let's be patient about that.
Yeah. The last question I actually plan to ask you is, how important is a conference like Energy Asia, and what would you like to see in future editions? But I'm going to give a two-parter to that.
Sure.
The second part of it is, where do you think we'll be? What progress do you think we would have made the next time you attend Energy Asia? Next year, presumably?
Okay, so I think in 12 months is, in the world of energy is not a very long time, right? I think we're already seeing a lot more projects happening. What I would like to see, what I hope to see, let's say, is perhaps the CCS project here in Malaysia, which Petronas is doing. That's further along. They have an engineering design. They're starting to work on the actual project. The hydrogen project they're talking about in Sarawak. I'm just giving you some concrete examples, right? That is also progressing, and there is at least some more money, more commitment of money, commitment of companies to do that. The other thing, in terms of your earlier question about the importance, if you notice in this conference, there were a lot of young people here. The connections they're making, if you went to the exhibition, it was packed.
Yep.
So the connections they're making, I hope they will be excited about working in the energy space for years to come, because they're going to solve the problem. Yeah. Most of us will be long gone.
Yeah, just a short one before we wrap. All these discussions, for the common man on the street, they seem pretty technical, pretty high up, pretty complex. So for those people who are watching out there, the normal men and women on the street, they are asking, what can I do now, today, to play a role, however small, in helping for us to reach the destination? So what's your answer to them?
I would say, there are some very simple things. Yep. If you have a very energy inefficient a car which is very old, or any kind of appliances which are which are not very energy efficient, do anything you can do to reduce your energy consumption without having to reduce your impact your lifestyle. That would be the first thing to do. I would also say, for a common person, become energy literate. Learn about just basic stuff, right? How the world of energy works, because a lot of people don't have that understanding, and that will help to become not only just better consumers, but also informed citizens who can then influence the policy of the country like Malaysia.
One small step goes a long way. Thank you so much, Dr. Atul.
Thank you very much.
Atul Arya, the Chief Energy Strategist of S&P Global Commodity Insights. I hope to see you here next year, and hope to see you guys too, maybe. See you in the next episode. Thank you for watching. That's it. Agenda Awani signing off from Energy Asia.
Thank you.